Another one bites the dust in Fulton County, Georgia. Fulton County DA Fani Willis has secured a second guilty plea in 2 days, her third so far, in that sprawling RICO case against Donald Trump's alleged criminal enterprise. This time from a previously unknown but vitally important architect of the entire coup plot, the legal architecture of it. Trump attorney Kenneth Chesebro is pleading guilty to a single felony charge of conspiracy to commit filing false documents. He'll receive 5 years probation in exchange for becoming a state witness and providing documents and evidence. It is the first felony plea in Fani Willis's case, and the charge that Chesebro is pleading guilty to involves the filing of false slates of Trump electors, an alleged conspiracy involving lawyer John Eastman, Rudy Giuliani, and of course, Donald J. Trump himself. Thanks to some intrepid reporting from the New York Times and the Washington Post and others, as well as the work of the January 6th Select Committee, we know that Chesebro wrote the blueprint for setting up those fake slates of electors. And that, of course, underpinned Team Trump's entire case for overturning the results of the 2020 presidential election on January 6th. The final report of the January 6th Select Committee says this, quote, Chesebro's first memo on November 18th suggested that the Trump campaign could gain a few extra weeks for litigation to challenge Wisconsin's election results, so long as a Wisconsin slate of Republican nominees to the Electoral College met on December 14th to cast placeholder Electoral College votes on a contingent basis. But ultimately, Chesebro set his sights on January 6th. The Select Committee's final report notes this, quote, on December 9th, Chesebro penned a second memo, which suggested another purpose for fake Electoral College votes on January 6th. It stated that unauthorized Trump electors in these states could be retroactively recognized by a court, the state legislature, or Congress. Less than a month later, the fake slates of Trump electors were a topic of conversation in the Oval Office. Here's how RNC Chairwoman Romney McDaniel described a conversation she had with Donald Trump and John Eastman just a few days before the Electoral College and the fake Trump electors met on December 14th.
What did the president say when he called you?
Essentially, he turned the call over to Mr. Eastman, who then proceeded to talk about the importance of the RNC helping the campaign gather these contingent electors in case any of the legal challenges that were ongoing changed the result of any of the states. I think more just helping them reach out and assemble them. But my understanding is the campaign did take the lead, and we just were helping them in that role.
Joining our coverage, former acting U.S. Solicitor General Neil Katyal is here, plus former top Justice Department official, MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissmann is back. Also back, former lead investigator for the January 6th Select Committee, Tim Heaphy. So we talked about this yesterday in the, I think it was your view, Andrew and Tim, that the plea with Sidney Powell might have underwhelmed from a legal perspective. This is a felony plea, and Chesebro brings us straight to Eastman and straight to Trump. I wonder your reaction to this development, Tim Heaphy.
Yeah, exactly right, Nicole. I think it's a bigger deal than the Powell plea because of the substance of it. He agreed to being part of a conspiracy. You're not in a conspiracy alone. You're in a conspiracy with others. And the proffer put forth by the government in open court today says he was in a conspiracy with former President Trump, with Rudy Giuliani, with John Eastman. So this points a finger very directly, an admission of Chesebro conspiring with others. It's a felony, not a misdemeanor. It involves the fake electors, kind of the core of this misguided legal strategy, as opposed to the Coffee County thing that was the subject of Sidney Powell's plea. So I think it's a very significant, more significant resolution, and frankly more serious in terms of threats to the other defendants than yesterday's plea.
You know, Andrew, I asked you about sort of prosecutorial inertia and just the power of Scott Hall was the first. I remember I came on the air. There was one sentence. I was Googling who he was. And of course, he takes us right to the break-in at Coffee County. Sidney Powell, wackadoodle as she is, takes us straight to the executive order to seize voting machines. But it's just misdemeanors. Now we're getting a bigger fish. We're getting one of the legal architects, someone Liz Cheney in those hearings described as essentially plopped into the Justice Department after Trump had lost re-election to carry out the coup. Are you feeling like that question about inertia is starting to be answered by Fani Willis?
Absolutely. This is the strategy when you indict big, is that good things happen. And you have people who start flipping and they roll onto each other. And as Tim pointed out, the reason this is more significant than Sidney Powell is because if you look at count 15, which is what he pled to, the other people involved in that conspiracy are names that we know up to and including the former president. And as you mentioned, Nicole, this goes to the very heart of the conspiracy of the January 6th scheme. It relates to the fake elector scheme. It relates to the Jeff Clark DOJ scheme. It relates to the pressure on Mike Pence. It is really core. And you have somebody who is a lawyer, a key architect saying, I committed a crime in connection with the fake elector scheme. So the pressure on, if not directly Donald Trump, because we know that Chesbro, at least from all accounts, had no direct dealings with Donald Trump, but he had direct dealings with other people, Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman. So that, again, rolling up, this is how you make cases. You move up the chain, and that is exactly what we're seeing. So this is an incredibly strong development on a core part of the case. It's not Coffee County. It's not a small segregable piece of the scheme. It is core. So this is really quite a big development.
You know, Andrew, it had a feeling, and this is like the hardwiring of my brain, maybe someday I can unwire it, of that first summer going into fall of the Mueller probe, right? I think it was Papadopoulos, and then it was Gates cooperating, and then it was Manafort, and then by Thanksgiving, I think it was Flynn. I mean, the pacing seems to be, the tempo between Hall and Sidney is longer than between Powell and Chesbro. And I know some of that is that jury selection was set to begin, but I wonder what you predict would happen next.
Well, it's certainly the case that things happen sort of on the courtroom steps. So, you know, it's not surprising that this would happen on both sides. This leads to a lot of good things on the government side. They avoid a 4 to 5 month trial. They avoid laying out the evidence for all the other defendants to see. But of course, on the defense side, they avoid the risk of a conviction and going to jail. Because remember, these are pleas where, although some with Powell, it's misdemeanors, with Chesbro, it's a felony, but both of them are no jail pleas if they live by their commitments. So I do think that the next thing we're going to see is a bit of a lull because we don't have any more trial dates that are set yet in Georgia. So I don't think we should be expecting to see a lot of developments there because we don't have that time pressure. But I do think that the next big thing is that we're going to see the March trial for Donald Trump. And one of the best things that happened today is that is really on the federal side, because if you're Jack Smith, you have these potential new witnesses, but you also don't have all the evidence and the messiness of the Georgia case happening as you're preparing your case. So the next big piece is, I think, the federal case, which we know from Tanya Chutkan, she is adamant that that date is sticking.
And Neil, obviously the only fish involved in that one is the biggest one of all, Donald Trump. I keep thinking of two things, and I really try to keep this pledge to my viewers to not gratuitously show anyone Donald Trump. But when he goes off about flippers, I mean, here you go, 3 in basically 6 weeks, 3 flippers. And then just pick up on Andrew's point, how this might benefit Jack Smith's case against the biggest fish of all, Donald Trump.
Well, I think today's developments, Nicole, are a big, big deal. And if you're Donald Trump right now, I think you're basically, to use the technical legal term, freaking out. And it's because you've got these two, people who cannot be painted in any way, shape, or form as being part of the Democrats or the deep state or whatever. These are kind of wackadoodle Republican Trump people, Sidney Powell and Ken Chesebro, and they have, they were vehement in saying they did nothing wrong for so long, and now both of them are pleading guilty to crimes and agreeing to cooperate with the investigators. Sidney Powell, indeed, has already, as part of her deal, taped an interview of giving testimony and has agreed to give further testimony as the case proceeds. So I think that this testimony from both of them is going to be important, not just in Georgia, not just against Giuliani, and I suspect ultimately Trump, but it's evidence that Jack Smith can use as well in his prosecution. And to me, the most telling thing for why I think this evidence is so significant is that the prosecutors in Georgia agreed to, as Andrew was saying, a no jail sentence for both of them. I think the only way you do that for both of these folks is if you think they've got significant evidence to give against higher-ups. And Fani Willis was billed to us, all Americans, as kind of someone who really understood RICO, really understood how to bring conspiracy cases and start flipping people. And I think we are seeing the tangible proof of how she was billed right now.